Hello, everyone, and welcome to the online live talk series on full-time international degree programs at Hong Kong U-Space. My name is Daniel Lambeth, and I'm a pilot and a lecturer in aviation at the Swinburne University of Technology in Melbourne, Australia. Today, I'm going to introduce Swinburne and the Bachelor of Aviation Management course to you, and I'm also going to talk about something that has been very important for all of aviation professionals over the last couple of years, and that's resilience. The title of our talk tonight is Why Resilience is Key for Aviation's Recovery. Now, we're going to be focusing on just one aspect of this, and that is the people. And by people, I mean not only the working professionals in the industry, but also you as students and prospective students. Hopefully, by the end of this talk, I will have explained why you are important to the recovery of the aviation industry after COVID, and also why this is the perfect time to start your studies and become part of the aviation industry, and how the partnership between Swinburne and Hong Kong U-Space can develop resilient people that will be key to the future of the industry. But before we get to that, you might be wondering where Swinburne University is and what makes the partnership between Hong Kong U-Space and Swinburne so special. Well, this degree is possible because of universities in these two beautiful cities, Hong Kong and also Melbourne. Now, remember that it was an Australian, Sydney Cansell, that actually helped to found Cathay Pacific Airways. And originally they were flying freight from Australia into China in a Douglas DC-3 aircraft. So in that way, you could say that Australia and Hong Kong have had a long and a very successful partnership in aviation. Now, the Swinburne campus itself is located only a very short train ride to the centre of Melbourne in Hawthorn in Australia. And it's a very picturesque campus. The aviation department is growing and it has some amazing facilities. They also have connections to Qantas and Jetstar, and also the CAE Oxford Aviation Academy, which is where our pilot students do their flight training. Hong Kong U-Space students who study with us often have an opportunity to visit us on campus in Melbourne, and also to establish international contacts. After all, aviation is a global industry, so it really helps to have an international contacts to rely on. Now, we've been teaching aviation at Swinburne for something like 20 years, and it's interesting to note that the university itself is actually still quite young. It only started as a university in 1992, but it's already ranked very highly in world university rankings. So as you can see on the screen there, we are in the top 350 in the 2022 Times Higher Education World University Rankings. We're in the top 300 in the 2021 academic ranking of world universities, and the top 200 universities in the world in transportation science and technology research. And we're ranked number 45 in the world in the 50 under 50 rankings as well. So some very high rankings for Swinburne. Now, all of this is great, but what about your journey? For those who are starting their careers in aviation now, what options might there be for employment later on? We've seen that the world is a very different place with COVID, and you might be wondering what sort of career opportunities might be available to you. Well, the good news is there are so many different careers that you can pursue in the aviation industry with an aviation management degree. So we're going to teach you about how the industry works. We'll give you a little bit of history so that you can understand why it works the way that it does. And we'll talk about strategies that are used now in aviation organisations like airlines, airports, etc. And then we'll help you to do some of your own research into a topic that interests you. Now, for example, you might be interested in how COVID has affected business travel. Has business travel really stopped because everyone is now using Zoom and Teams? What about leisure travel? Do people still fly to the same countries for their holidays? We'll provide mentoring as you do some real world research like this to learn something new about the industry, and perhaps you'll end up researching something that nobody else has even looked at before. Now, once you finish the program, you'll be ready to take the next step in your career, and you might continue to do postgraduate studies, or you could get a job with an airline or as a consultant. There are so many jobs available. Even now, the aviation industry has got so many diverse roles. From a practical point of view, of course, the industry is focused around airports. These are the points of arrival and departure for aircraft, places that facilitate the flow of aircraft, of cargo, and of people. But how well it all runs and the effectiveness of air transport depends on the people, the managers, the flight crew, the cabin crew, the engineers, the office staff, caterers, refuelers, air traffic controllers, regulators. All these people are so important in the whole aviation system. And it's important to have the right people in the right places and to have these good relationships. Now, the resilience that the industry has shown during COVID is really a consequence of the people in the industry. Those who, despite having been displaced or furloughed or made redundant, have been committed to aviation, have been ready to return to work at a moment's notice, or they've even retrained into a different role. Some people have even gone and looked for work away from their hometown. Yet people are the most valuable assets in the aviation industry, and it is the resilience of people that has made the industry itself resilient. Now, with people being so important to the industry, I thought I'd briefly introduce some of the staff from Swinburne. And I'll start with Professor Zheng Li, because he is the chair of the Department of Aviation at Swinburne. He's also founder and president for the Institute of Aviation Research, and he's a visiting professor to Civil Aviation University of China. He regularly advises senior executives around the world on strategic issues. Then we have Dr. Tommy Chung, who's with us tonight. He's a senior lecturer in the Department of Aviation at Swinburne. Now, previously, Dr. Chung was an associate professor at Hung Seng University in Hong Kong. He's experienced in business analytics, engineering management, supply chain management, and he advises on airline operations, aviation policy, and also aviation strategy. In addition, we have several industry experts that support our program. And as you can see on the screen here, I've just got 4 of us. You can see by reading the bios there that there are vast amounts of experience in our team, including airline and airport experience, management, operations, different airlines, different parts of the world as well. As for myself, I was an instructor, a flight instructor for China Southern Airlines. I was an airline pilot for Cathay Pacific. I'm a corporate and business jet pilot as well, and I'm also a researcher in transportation networks. But there are some other people who are just as important, and those people are our students and alumni. Now, each year we get a large cohort of students starting out on a pretty exciting journey, which is to join the aviation community and to gain international experience through their studies, to establish new connections in Hong Kong and also in Australia. And during their studies, some of the students get to travel to Australia. They have the opportunity to attend lectures at the Swinburne Campus. Some even have the opportunity to do some practical flying experience. Maybe they visit the Qantas Training Centre. They might go to Avalon Airport as well. At other times, Swinburne lecturers travel to Hong Kong to teach. Now, of course, this has been affected by COVID, but all our lecturers, as you've seen, are very experienced in the industry. And this gives students a great chance to meet with some knowledgeable and passionate teachers and connect with people from around the world. Now, you might be wondering, what are the prospects of finding jobs when the aviation industry has been so badly affected? Well, let's be honest, the last couple of years have been difficult for the aviation industry. Now, when COVID first struck, almost immediately, airlines stopped a lot of their flying. Aircraft were grounded. Many staff were made redundant to immediately save cash. Others were placed on indefinite leave without pay. Now, you can see in the charts here the number of jobs that European airlines were looking at cutting in 2020. Huge numbers of jobs. And we can see that in the US, the airline industry in the US, around 80,000 jobs were lost by October of 2020. That's almost 10% of everyone that was employed by the airlines. Now, all of this was devastating to workers and families. It was a dramatic and unexpected blow. And just months before COVID, the industry had actually been surging. So aviation professionals were in demand. So this all came as a big shock to the system. And of course, you would know that aviation in Hong Kong was particularly hard hit, especially Cathay Pacific. Many employees lost their jobs. Cathay Dragon ceased operations. Now, it would have been very easy for a lot of people to give up on aviation and to permanently leave the industry. This is a really interesting chart because when we think about the headlines during 2020, it seemed like so many airlines went out of business, including Cathay Dragon. But what really happened? Well, actually, there were fewer airline failures than we would normally expect. If you take 2018 as an example, that was a very good year for aviation. There were lots of people flying, but 56 airlines failed that year. That's many more than failed up until October of 2020 during COVID, during the height of the lockdowns and the border closures. So as the chart shows, there were a lot of aircraft parked. Airline revenues were slashed. The airlines went into survival mode. They reduced their cash burn by cutting wages. And this is why many people in the industry lost their jobs. But a lot of airlines were able to secure additional funds through governments and also through private equity. And this increased the industry's resilience. And it puts it in a good position to rapidly recover from COVID when the demand for travel returns. Now, although there weren't a huge number of airlines failing, flying, we know, dramatically declined, and more than we have ever seen before from just a single event. But we have seen devastating blows to aviation in the past. The 9/11 terrorist attacks in 2001 were particularly bad. After that, there were many new rules and regulations introduced. Passengers lost confidence in the industry, and it was a few years before the industry really recovered. Then only a few years after that, we had the global financial crisis. And again, people stopped flying. But this time it was because they were concerned about their financial futures, or perhaps they'd recently lost their jobs or their savings. But again, airlines returned to profitability. And have a look at those charts. Notice what happened after each of these crises. The number of people and the airline profits became greater and greater in the years following. The industry continued to grow exponentially. The number of air passengers is expected to double in the next 20 years. Now, we've taken about 80 years to get to the point where we are today. We can say that from around about the Chicago Convention, that was in some ways the beginning of modern civil aviation. And yet, in only 20 more years, the industry and travel is expected to double. But that's not all. If we look at Boeing's own forecasts, we're going to need more than 600,000 new pilots. We're going to need more than 600,000 new technicians and nearly 900,000 cabin crew by the year 2040. Now, of those numbers, that's over 2 million people. Of those numbers, over 400,000 are going to be in the Asia Pacific region, and another 400,000 are going to be in China. So we are really lucky to be in a part of the world that's going to see huge growth in the aviation industry in the next 2 decades. But what about COVID? We saw that it had a dramatic effect on jobs, but look what's happening now. These are some of the news headlines from around the world. From April of 2021, Middle East carriers to face post-pandemic pilot shortage. A little bit later in the year, August of 2021. Airline industries staffing shortages leading to cancellations and longer waits. And then later in the year, October, Christmas in doubt over airline staff shortages. That was from a newspaper in Australia. Then we have another one in November, which was also from Australia, new Northern Queensland training program to address pandemic pilot shortage. And then in December, we had a couple of headlines as well. Airlines cancel flights due to COVID staffing shortages. And airlines in US facing shortage of pilots and other workers, say executives. So the shortages that we see now and are going to see into the future are not all pilots. There's management staff, there's all sorts of office staff. There are shortages across the board. Now, the recovery in Europe has been a little bit more difficult compared to North America. The countries there are still being locked down due to new COVID variants, such as Omicron. But there's still a lot of confidence about aviation over the next few years. Eurocontrol is the air traffic management organisation in Europe, And a recent analysis by Eurocontrol confirmed the resilience of the industry, despite how bad things really were in 2020. Traffic is already at nearly 80% of 2019 levels. And by March, only weeks away, it should be back around 85% of 2019 levels. This is much higher than the expectations were only a year ago. In some scenarios, we could be back to nearly 95% of 2019 levels by March. Now, the forecast over the next few years is also very optimistic. In fact, we could exceed 2019 aviation traffic this year, and it's expected to climb steadily after that. So this is all good news. A rapid recovery is going to be thanks to the resilience of the industry and the people working in the industry. Now, this is not to say that nothing will have changed compared to 2019. The status quo has been affected as a result of COVID. Just in Hong Kong, of course, we lost Cathay Dragon, but now Greater Bay Airlines has an opportunity in part because of this. Now, places like Australia, we've seen Virgin, which has been completely transformed. The airline has gone from an international one that serviced international and domestic routes on wide body and narrow body aircraft. They now focus on the domestic market. And we've seen similar stories all over the world of airlines transforming their businesses to remain resilient and to remain in the industry. So what we've seen is not the natural attrition of airlines that we're used to. The changes have been because of COVID, which has badly affected travel, and also because of government intervention that has made the industry more resilient. But as we saw a few slides ago, it's not unusual for airlines to come and go each year. So all over the world, people are wanting to fly again, and we expect to see more of this year. Yeah, and more flying, of course, is going to mean more airline executives and people in the industry smiling, as you can see in these pictures. Now, I've used the word resilience quite a bit. I've mentioned it a lot in relation to aviation over the last year or so. So what exactly is it? Well, you can see from these definitions that it's really just an ability to recover from something that's bad. For those of us in the aviation industry, and for people who are starting a career in aviation as well, COVID has been something that has had a negative effect on the industry. And we need to be able to adapt to unpredictable or unexpected changes. That's important because the industry itself is only as resilient as the people that are in it. So the question is, can aviation continue to run safely and profitably after the pandemic? And can we continue in our aviation careers and be successful? Now, the answer, thankfully, is yes, as long as we are resilient people. But is this something that we can learn? Yeah, luckily it is. In fact, we've been learning resilience since birth. Every time your parents let you fail so you could learn a lesson, whenever you learn a new way to problem solve, every new skill and piece of knowledge, finding that you could recover from your mistakes, observing strategies that your friends and role models were using to help them. All of these things have helped to build our individual levels of resilience. What are some examples of resilience in an aviation context? Well, I'll go back to 9/11. We've talked about it already. But as you might recall, in 2001, aircraft in the US were hijacked by terrorists, and they flew into the Twin Towers and also the Pentagon. Aircraft in the US at this time were ordered to land immediately. People became afraid of flying. Airlines went bankrupt. And that includes United Airlines, Delta Airlines, and US Airways. These are some of the biggest airlines in the world. And it's only the resilience that these airlines had and that was within the industry that saw the recovery in the years following the attacks. And of course, we know now that United and Delta continue to operate very profitably today. In 2009, US Airways Flight 1549, an Airbus A320, landed in the Hudson River after a flock of geese were ingested into the engines and caused both the engines to fail. Now, this was something completely unexpected and something that had never happened before. And there was no training, there was no procedure, there was no checklist for this situation. But the crew were able to adapt and land safely in the river. Qantas Flight 32, This was an engine failure that occurred on a Qantas 380 in 2010. The failure itself caused significant damage to lots of aircraft systems and caused many other systems also to fail. Now, the checklists on the aircraft could not handle all of these failures, but the resilience of the pilots meant that they could handle the unexpected disaster and improve the situation through their knowledge and through the decisions that they made. And then they managed to land the aircraft safely without major incident. And of course, we can also see more recent examples, like, for example, Boeing. After the mistakes that were made and the crash of two 737 MAX aircraft, Boeing have addressed the systemic problems that led to those crashes. They've changed their management structure. They've looked over their quality and safety systems. Boeing is an important and resilient company and is doing what's necessary to improve their operations and to restore trust in their brand. And of course, a final example of resilience is the industry's recovery from COVID that we are watching happen right now. Now, some people refer to the 7 C's of resilience, and these are like a guide to building our own resilience. The first of these is competence. Improve your aviation knowledge to understand the implications of a pandemic. This is an ideal time to study or to do research and to improve your aviation knowledge. Although there may have been fewer jobs over the last year, those that increase their competence are going to be very well prepared as the industry bounces back. Then we have confidence. Have confidence in your own abilities and skills. You should know that the way that you think is, of course, different to the way I think or different to the way your friends or colleagues think. But you should have confidence that your skills are just as valuable to the industry as everyone else's. Connection, I've mentioned a few times already. Develop ties to others in the industry to increase your sense of community and security. And this is a perfect time to connect with people that have similar interests in aviation, whether they happen to be in Hong Kong or they're abroad. You can use social media like LinkedIn and Twitter. This is a really good time to develop a network and use that network for support. Character. Trust in your own set of values and have empathy for others during difficult times. Remember that there are many people in worse positions than you or who don't have the opportunities that you have. Even just being here tonight at this seminar means that we have a privilege that not everybody else has. Continue to remind yourself of the privileges that you have. Contribution. Understand that you can make a small difference to the industry despite difficult circumstances. Everyone is unique and everyone can make a unique contribution to the aviation industry. The industry consists of more than 11 million people, and every one of those people makes a small but valuable contribution to it. Very important, coping. Deal effectively with stress caused by the pandemic by focusing on positives. So this is part of your resilience training. Develop strategies to reduce stress. Eating properly, sleeping properly. We've all heard these before. Exercising well. These are very important to improving your resilience. And the final one is control. Understand that you can control the outcomes of your decisions. Although some things are, of course, outside your control, you can make decisions to improve things. Decisions about your career, for example, even if we just change things in a small way. Now, in 2020, I wrote an article for Flight Global about why resilience was important for people who wanted to be airline pilots. By July of 2020, COVID had made the world a very different place. Countries were locked down, people were restricted to their homes, borders were shut. There were no vaccines at that time. The world's leaders didn't really know what to do and people were afraid. Aviation, of course, was hit hard. People were losing their jobs. Pilots and flight attendants captured a lot of the headlines, but managers and office staff were also being made redundant. And it was not only airlines. There were also people from ATC, there were regulators, there were caterers, there were engineers, there were airport workers. And then there was the broader travel industry, travel agents, hospitality staff, and others. There are 11 million jobs, as I said before, in aviation worldwide, but there are another 76 million jobs that are supported by the aviation industry. Now, as a worker myself in the aviation industry, I saw my friends being furloughed, being made redundant, losing their jobs, and suffering from the uncertainty they had about the future. I wanted to remind people that one of the greatest strengths we have as aviation professionals is resilience. sometimes without even knowing it. We've been training in resilience for our whole careers. We've seen ups and downs in the industry before. I remember watching 9/11 unfold on live television in 2001 and thinking that my aviation career was over before it had even begun. So when COVID happened, I wanted to remind people in the aviation industry that this was an opportunity to build resilience and even improve their careers. And this is what I wrote at the end of the article. If there is one characteristic that serves those in the aviation industry well throughout their careers, it is resilience in the face of adversity. Your career plans might be on hold, but those that take this opportunity to complete or extend their studies, learn a new aviation-related skill, get any aviation experience they can, and build resilience will not be disappointed. History is on your side. There will be a recovery from the economic fallout of this pandemic, and you will be well placed to capitalise on it. If you have ever wanted to study or work in the aviation industry, then you should go ahead and do it. Your training in resilience starts now. So let this be the inspiration for you. If you have any interest in aviation, now is the time to pursue it. Things might not seem ideal because of COVID, but they're improving all the time. And we've seen how there's going to be a shortage of aviation professionals for years to come. Now is when all of us in the aviation industry need to be resilient. Don't give up on the industry. Keep going and know that things will get better. This is how the industry recovers, because of the resilience of the people in it. The resilience of the industry depends on the resilience of the people in it. It's worth saying again. We've come a long way since early 2020, when there were about 80% of the world's flying had just stopped. Now we're seeing the industry recover, and we can expect great demand for aviation over the next few years. It's not going to be long before the skies over North America, which you can see here in this animation, and the rest of the world, look something like they did before the pandemic. Resilience has kept us going through difficult times, and resilience will help the industry to thrive in the future. Thank you, everyone, for listening. So I open the floor to any questions. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask them through the available YouTube or Zoom chats. All right, so we have a question. Will we have a chance to go to Swinburne during COVID-19? So if I can, I'd just like to introduce Dr. Tommy Chung, and he might have a better idea than me on how to answer that particular question. Thanks, Tommy.
Hi everyone. Yes, I think so. I think when the border is open, I think the Australian border is open, we would be able to allow students to, say the Hong Kong-based student, to come to Swinburne for an exchange. That would be possible, yes.
Thanks, Tommy. So that's good news for everybody who's interested in being able to establish those connections. As I was saying, international connections are very important. Aviation is a global industry, and it's very important to have international connections. If you do get the opportunity to come to Swinburne and to come to Victoria, to Melbourne in Australia, then that's a great opportunity. I do have a photo here of some of our students recently after graduation, which is a really nice photo. I do like this particular one, some of these students over the last few years. So as you can see, everybody very proud of their achievements, as they should be. For those people that are wondering a little bit more about the course itself, I do have an information page, which you may have seen. I'll go to that in a minute. Just had another question. When will the program start? Are there any scholarships? Well, that will bring me to moving on to the next slide, actually, because this will, I don't have the date on there. The start date, I think, and again, Tommy, I might hand over to you on this. I think it's September of 2022, Tommy?
Yes, it's usually start in September for about 18 months, but the actual enrollment date you should check with Hong Kong Space. And scholarship is always available, so but of course under some criteria. So again, check with Hong Kong Space.
And I've put up the details there. Of course, Ms. Winnie Lam is the contact person through Hong Kong Space, and her details are on the screen there for inquiries. Question, how's the learning environment in Swinburne University? Well, I can speak on this one from my own personal experience because I completed my own studies there a few years ago. And I really enjoyed the environment and the way that the teaching was done. A lot of the teaching was online, but the campus itself, as you would have seen at the beginning of my presentation, there was a very short video just of overflying the campus. It's a beautiful campus. And it's very conducive to studying, but also to feeling in a relaxed environment. So to me, the learning environment was very, very nice. It's a young university, there's a lot of modern facilities, but there's a lot of tradition of being a university as well. So it's a really good environment to learning at Swinburne, whether you're online or whether you're on campus. Another question, is it possible to join the program after a gap year? Dr. Chung, if you've got the answer to that one.
Yeah, yes, it's we open the door for everyone.
Very inclusive.
Yes. Yes. But after a gap year, I think you means after you finish the diploma, right? Yeah, for as long as you satisfy the entry requirements, then yes, we can enroll you into the course.
So another question, is there any chance to drive the plane even if we won't be in Swinburne? So I presume you mean, can you do pilot training through Hong Kong Space if you're not able to come to Swinburne? I would have to hand over for the answer to that one.
Yes, I think the answer might be no for this. Is there any chance? Depends on if I think in Hong Kong, even if we won't be in Swinburne, I'm not sure what you mean actually. But I think you need to go through some. You can come to Australia for some leisure flight, or for but for pilot training, yes, you will have to be a different program. But Hong Kong may also offer some sort of a pilot theory program. So you can check with them. Yeah. Question 6 is yours.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, we have, would you mind to share your view on Hong Kong's aviation industry, which relies purely on international travel? Yes, that's a good question. And as I said, I used to fly for Cathay Pacific Airways, and in and out of Hong Kong all the time. So I have some familiarity with it and with Hong Kong. So the Hong Kong's aviation industry is very unique, of course, because we don't have the internet, we don't have the domestic market. We only have the international market. On the other hand, we also have a big freight market as well, not just passenger, but also freight. All right, so there's that side of it too. And in terms of the airspace, there are some tricky requirements because we have Chinese airspace, we have Philippines airspace. We're very surrounded, and so Hong Kong has some challenges going forward because of these different aspects. Because there is only international travel and no real domestic travel. Because the airspace is quite small and restricted on each side. And because there is a big influence from cargo traffic that's very important to Hong Kong, very important to the aviation industry in Hong Kong, the freight and cargo industry. So these three aspects of the industry in Hong Kong make for a bit of a challenge. But we have the third runway, obviously, which is being built. The last couple of years have been very slow in terms of the number of flights going ahead and the passengers travelling. But I think that aviation will pick up very quickly again in Hong Kong after COVID. It might take a little while, maybe a little bit longer than some other parts of the world. North America is very quickly recovered. May take a little bit longer in Hong Kong, but I have no doubt that it will, because it's a very important hub for international travel and for cargo as well.
I think I can add a little bit on that.
Thanks.
If you look at the location of Hong Kong, which is almost very close to Shenzhen and also Guangzhou, so the three airports are actually in competition in many ways, and also in some sort of collaboration. Of course, most of the Guangzhou and Shenzhen are serving the domestic market, domestic China market, and while Hong Kong is a big hub, international big hub. But over the year, you can see the Guangzhou and Hong Kong are actually in a lot of, there's a lot of overlap between the routes. Actually, almost 70% of their routes are overlapped. And so without COVID, actually, Guangzhou is still behind. But you look at Guangzhou, the number of one-way in Guangzhou versus Hong Kong. Hong Kong only have 2 one-way, and and the third one-way is still in progress. So, but Guangzhou, I think, already has maybe 4 one-ways. So in that sense, Guangzhou is much bigger, but still the traffic between the two is actually very close. So in a sense, without COVID, Hong Kong is actually better than Guangzhou in terms of the overall passenger traffics. But I think because of the COVID, Guangzhou actually overtake Hong Kong in the last 2 years. So having said that, I think during the recovery, Hong Kong will be much better than Guangzhou in many ways, particularly the international markets. Yep.
And that's a big area of research. Dr. Chung is obviously very much an expert in that area, and he's researching a lot of that right now. So you've definitely talking to the right people.
And also there's a lot of study going on about the Greater Bay Area integrations and collaborations. So how does Hong Kong integrate into those systems? Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity coming up. Yep. The question you can
Chris. Yeah, so we have a question here. Will the Russian-Ukraine tension, the possible invasion of Taiwan and threats to South Korea further delay recovery of aviation in the coming years? Well, you have to understand that these threats are not, they're not new again. The threats are always there with us. The only thing that changes is where the threats are at this particular time. And of course, at this particular time, Ukraine is a big issue. But certainly, if you look back a number of years, we've had problems in Europe in the past, obviously with North America, especially with the terrorist attacks and things like that. So these kind of threats and tensions and shocks to the system, they have regularly been issues for aviation over the whole history of aviation. So I don't believe that they will cause a further delay in recovery. Of course, it depends how serious these situations become. But certainly we've seen in the past history of aviation, is that regularly there have been shocks, SARS, COVID, GFC, 9/11, .com, all these sort of things. We've seen over the years, the industry always recovers, and not only recovers, but does even better afterwards. So yes, there will be shocks to the system. I'm not sure that these particular ones, the Ukraine, Taiwan, and South Korea, are going to be particularly damaging. It really depends exactly what happens. But certainly the aviation industry is in very good shape and will be going into the future.
It could affect the airspace, right? The Ukraine and Russian, and that there's a lot of routes from Hong Kong going over to Europe through those areas, I think.
Yeah, so often, some parts of the airspace will close down if there's tension, and we've seen that before when the Malaysian aircraft was shot down over Ukraine a few years ago. Part of the airspace was closed off. Now, that didn't restrict the amount of flying that was going on or the number of passengers that were travelling. All it did was it means that aircraft now have to be routed around certain areas that might be dangerous. So we may see the same sort of thing again if there's any further tensions around Ukraine. We've got a question, Tommy, you might want to answer this one. I've finished my diploma in Sydney a few years ago and have been working in the industry for a few years. Just wondering if I'm still allowed to apply for the course.
Yes, of course. Given your experience in the industry, as well as you have finished your diplomas, yes, I think you are eligible for the course. You actually said you may satisfy the entry requirement. So, but please check with Hong Kong Space again on this. I think it's acceptable. Yep.
And we have a question. Is there any information about employment after graduation? Tommy, do you have a good answer for that one?
Yes, I think we regularly do some survey, but I don't have the latest statistic. But I can get back to you on this. We do some survey, right? Probably Winnie from Hong Kong Space can help on this.
All right, a question. What is the main challenges that you faced in becoming a pilot? Well, certainly the challenges for me in becoming a pilot was timing in the industry. And as I mentioned to you earlier in the talk, I remember watching 9/11 happen live on television. At that stage, I was a very junior pilot. And I could see from what was happening that this was going to be a problem for aviation. And I was worried that my career, I would never be able to become an airline pilot because, the industry would not recover or something like that. So the main challenges that I faced when I was becoming a pilot was really just uncertainty. I wasn't really sure about when I would get into an airline or when I would be able to get the job that I wanted. And sometimes I wasn't even confident that I would be able to get the job that I wanted. Now, it's easy to look back and say, well, that was kind of silly. But when you're looking forward, sometimes things are not so clear. So that was the main challenge. It was a mental challenge for me of being resilient. Really, it comes back to our talk. I was working in jobs that didn't pay much money and where I had to live in very, very small towns. And it was just a matter of getting through that period of time so that I could get the jobs that I wanted to get. But of course, that's something that changes depending on where you are in the world as well. You know, in Australia, we've got a very big general aviation industry, and often pilots will start off in general aviation. In other parts of the world, it's just as easy. You can go straight from your pilot training to being an airline pilot, but it's different in different parts of the world.
Yes, I think given the cargo demands also around the world and in Hong Kong, I think there'll be a lot of job opportunities in that areas. And also Hong Kong also has some charter flight business sort of related to the China's, I think. So that again, there's a lot of growth in that area, particularly the charter flight, because a lot of people now want to take private flights out of Hong Kong.
Well, thank you everyone for the questions. We're going to wrap up now and finish up for tonight. Thank you for attending this evening. And if you do have any further questions, please, you can see Miss Winnie Lamb's contact details on the screen. Please don't hesitate to contact us in regards to any questions that you have. Thank you everyone for attending, and we'll see you later.